is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Boeing CEO apologizes to the families of victims of 2 deadly plane crashes. The UN Security Council to hold an emergency meeting on the situation in Libya. Belgium apologizes for colonial-era abductions of mixed-race children from African countries. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Nigeria plans to raise $5 billion in foreign and local bonds for infrastructure development. And in sports, Kenya and defending champions Namibia qualify for the Under-20 Bartes Rugby Cup finals. Well, let's start with a look at the ongoing investigation into the crash of an Ethiopian Airlines Boeing 737 MAX on March 10th in Addis Ababa. Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg has acknowledged for the first time that an automated flight system on the jets played a role in the crash, and that of another 737 MAX 5 months earlier. Yang Zhao has the details.
We at Boeing are sorry for the lives lost in the recent 737 MAX accidents. These tragedies continue to weigh heavily on our hearts and minds, and we extend our sympathies to the loved ones of the passengers and crew on board Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302.
The apology from the world's aviation giant came after Ethiopian Transportation Department released its preliminary report on the March 10th crash in Addis Ababa. And for the first time, Muilenburg acknowledged in a short video that bad data feeding into an anti-stall system on the 737 MAX jet played a role in the crashes.
The full details of what happened in these 2 accidents will be issued by the government authorities in the final reports. But with the release of the preliminary report of the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 accident investigation, it's apparent that in both flights, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, known as MCAS, activated in response to erroneous angle of attack information.
Simply speaking, the MCAS system can automatically lower the plane's nose to prevent engine stalling in certain circumstances. The preliminary report didn't specifically blame the MCAS, but did mention that a doomed Ethiopian Airlines jet had repeatedly nosedived before the crash. Ethiopian aviation officials say their investigation find no pilot error.
The crew obtained the license and qualifications to conduct the flight. Repetitive, uncommanded aircraft nose-down conditions are noticed. The crew performed all the procedures repeatedly provided by the manufacturer, but was not able to control the aircraft.
The findings drew the strongest link yet between the March 10th crash in Ethiopia and an October crash off the coast of Indonesia. Both involved Boeing 737 MAX 8 jetliners. All 346 people on the 2 planes were killed. The investigators have recommended that Boeing review and correct a flight control unit and for other authorities to confirm changes made before the grounded 737 MAX 8s can fly again. The Ethiopian government is preparing to take legal action against the U.S. manufacturer. Yang Zhao, CGTN.
Meanwhile, a family of one of the victims of the crash has already declared that it is suing Boeing for the death of their daughter. Speaking in Chicago on Thursday, Thomas and Nadia Stumo also accused the Federal Aviation Administration for not conducting independent tests to ensure the plane's safety. The couple lost their daughter, Samia, in the March 10 Ethiopian Airlines crash.
My wife, Nadia, woke me up early in the morning on March 10th to say that a plane crash had happened in Ethiopia. I did not believe Samia could be on that plane. I could not lose another child. But she was on the plane. I could not breathe. My son tore, paced, and sobbed. We drove 3 hours to New York City to find the earliest airplane to go to Addis.
We are one of 337 families with such huge holes because this aircraft didn't function. Samia and her fellow passengers shouldn't have died. Those in charge of creating and selling this plane did not treat Samia as they would their own daughters. We as passengers need to demand that planes be safe so that no one else dies. Profits should not come before safety, and we are making this effort here to help prevent a third crash.
As stated, we have brought a claim against the FAA. They were responsible for ensuring to the American public and to the world that the aircraft that was going to be flying, that aircraft was safe for flight. It is pretty clear they failed in that regard. Unfortunately, the FAA delegated much of its responsibility in making sure the component part, in this case the MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System, was safe. They delegated that responsibility to the manufacturer, Boeing, who had another motive of getting this aircraft out for sale. They should not have delegated that responsibility or as much responsibility to Boeing, and should have made their own independent determination that this system was safe.
And the Stumo family, they're not alone in seeking answers. Back in Ethiopia, another family is also calling for justice.
The concerned bodies, from the government to the airline, have to imagine themselves as the victims' families. We want justice, not a delayed justice, but a quick one. I heard the full report may take 1 year. That's too long.
Well, let's turn to news in Libya. Tension is brewing in the country. This after forces loyal to Eastern Libyan commander Khalifa Haftar captured the city of Garian. It's just 100 kilometers south of the capital, Tripoli. The United Nations Security Council says it's deeply concerned by the military movements and the risk of confrontation in the country. It's due to hold an emergency meeting later today. Meanwhile, UN Chief Antonio Guterres is in Tripoli to promote peace talks. He's met the head of the Tripoli-based government, Fayez al-Sarraj, and is due to hold talks with Khalifa Haftar.
A call of might, perhaps.
Today
we will shake the land under the feet of the oppressors who transgressed beyond bounds in the lands and heaped therein mischief. Today our voice is loud, filling the skies. For you, Tripoli. For you, Tripoli.
The eastern-based troops are currently marching towards Tripoli, a strategy analysts believed is aimed at expanding Haftar's control and intimidate his rivals in the western part of the country. But many fear it will bring a conflict with Libya's internationally recognized government to a potentially dangerous new level.
I want to make a very strong appeal, an appeal for all military movements to stop, an appeal for containment, calm, de-escalation, both military and political and verbal de-escalation.
The Tripoli-based government says it's prepared to respond to any threats aimed at destabilizing the region. Local armed groups and the country's highest religious authority have also vowed to defend Tripoli.
We do not target these people. They are welcome to come and join us in the armed forces, and are welcome to come to the training centers and welcome in the military academies. We also welcome supporting them economically if they wanted that. So we need them to leave this battle because it's not a winning battle. It's a battle which includes people alongside the army, and not the army on its own, the people and the army.
The developments mark a dramatic escalation of a power tussle in Libya. It is also a setback for the UN and Western countries which have been trying to mediate between Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj and Haftar. Libya has remained beset by turmoil since 2011 following the ouster and death of President Muammar Gaddafi after 4 decades in power. Since then, the country's stark political divisions have yielded 2 rival seats of power, one in Al-Bayada, to which Haftar is linked, and another in Tripoli. Chomhono, CGTN.
Indeed, worrying developments there in Libya. Let's bring you some analysis on these latest developments. We're joined from Cairo by our political analyst, Ziad Aqil. Ziad, always a pleasure to have you with us. It's clear, of course, now that Khalifa Haftar and his army are advancing on the Libyan capital. And this, as we know, is raising the prospect of renewed civil war. But what is Khalifa Haftar's agenda, and are there regional forces at play at all?
First of all, hello. It's always a pleasure to be here. I believe that this is a part of a strategy that Khalifa Haftar has been following maybe for the past year, starting with the attacks or the moves that he has done in Derna, and then his military geographical expansion in the south, and then now towards the west. Are there regional forces at power? Of course, there are. There is Egypt and the UAE, which are the main two allies of the Libyan National Army and of the idea of bringing military stability to the Libyan conflict. At the same time, the agenda of Khalifa Haftar entails that the Libyan National Army becomes the only and the sole legitimate military power in the country. And he can only sustain this since all political negotiations have failed around this specific point, which is one of the main causes of the failure of the Drought agreement signed back in December 2015. Then the presence, the actual practical military presence on the ground becomes the main tool of sustaining such a goal. So what Khalifa Haftar is doing is not something that is spontaneous. It is something that is a part of a strategy that's been going on for some time now.
And so the question about the strategy, you mentioned that, of course, there's been expansion in the south and now expansion in the west. Does Khalifa Haftar have the capability to seize the capital, Tripoli?
This is very much argumentative. We cannot say, of course, but there are two facts that we have to take care of when we try to answer this question. The first one is the fact that the Libyan National Army, under the leadership of Khalifa Haftar, has become the most powerful military force and the only cohesive or coherent military force inside of Libya right now. The other fact is that the Libyan West is actually seeing divisions and fragmentation among its military forces, making them become more weak and less advanced and capacitated. And at the same time, Khalifa Haftar keeps making new regional alliances, either with, as we said before, Egypt and the UAE, or Saudi Arabia, or even Russia and France. So Khalifa Haftar today has the political capacity to seize Tripoli. But the military capacity, of course, it will not be done without confrontation. And it seems that military facts say that Haftar's forces are the strongest, but it is in everybody's interests that no Libyan citizens get harmed because of this.
And of course, we're already seeing a very quick response from the UN. The Secretary General is in Tripoli. The Security Council expected to hold an emergency meeting later today. Beyond the UN, is there a role that the broader international community can play in trying to ensure that no civilians are hurt, but I suppose most importantly, that the peace process gets back on track?
Well, I think there can be a process of supervision that no members of the international community, no countries of the international community bring any arms in the Libyan inside at all at this time, because it is by Security Council regulations, there's a ban on selling weapons to Libya. Yet there are some weapons that get sort of through the border illegally. It is very important that this does not happen at this point in time, and this is something that the international community has done before in previous cases and has tools to do it. At the same time, there should be the international community should be ready to offer any humanitarian assistance needed in Libya, because there can be need for medication, there can be need for basic living supplies like food, water, and even electricity. So there should be some form of a coalition from the international community to have some sort of a fund ready to back any needs, any human needs that Libya might have over the coming phase.
Indeed, the international community will have to tread very carefully. Well, no doubt we will speak to you again, Ziad Akhil, on more on this as the situation develops. But thank you so much for joining us now from Cairo. Meanwhile, Libya is also facing a refugee crisis. The country's west coast is the leading departure point in North Africa for migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. Now, they're mainly from Africa and are fleeing wars and poverty. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who, as we know, is in Tripoli, expressed shock as he visited one of the detention centers there. The Ain Zara detention center houses around 4,000 migrants. They're in detention for an unlimited time and without any hope of regaining their lives. Most of them are jailed after Libyan coast guards have intercepted makeshift boats bound for Europe.
The center has an adaptive capacity of about 4,000 immigrants. Among them, between 800 to 900 immigrants were deported over the past few weeks. A visit from the United Nations Secretary General and the Libya envoy Ghassan Salama and UNHCR was mainly to inspect migrants' conditions, their health conditions, and if they receive sufficient assistance, and if the international organizations responsible for assisting the migrants are fully performing their duties.
To Uganda now, the country's Inspector General of Police has joined rescue efforts for an American tourist and driver who were kidnapped at the Queen Elizabeth National Park. The two were reportedly taken by unknown gunmen while on a game drive in western Uganda. Isabel Nakiria reports.
The hunt for an American tourist and driver has entered second day, but according to police, there are so far no leads. The incident took place in Uganda's Queen Elizabeth National Park, one of the country's most popular tourist destinations. It borders eastern DRC, and Ugandan police say they've sealed off the border to prevent the kidnappers from crossing over to the other side. A search operation is underway with teams from the Ugandan police and the army joining forces with rangers from the country's wildlife authority. But concerns are growing as the area around the national park is remote and the network coverage is poor. It's reported that 4 unknown gunmen ambushed and kidnapped the tourists and their driver and are now asking for a ransom of $500,000. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Belgium apologizes for colonial-era abductions of mixed-race children from African countries. And Kenya distributes food aid as drought deepens in the country's north.
Data of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice. The Belgian federal government has apologized for the abduction of thousands of mixed-race children who were born in the colonial era. Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel made the apology, and it marks the first time the government has acknowledged the wrongdoing. Our Europe correspondent Kevin Osbeck has more from Brussels.
Prime Minister Charles Michel says he hopes this will be a step forward. From 1959 to 1962, the Belgian government took thousands of children born from white settlers and black mothers and sent them to special schools here in Belgium run by the Catholic Church. It's part of the darkest chapter of Belgium's colonial rule of what today is the DRC, Burundi, and Rwanda. Prime Minister Michel said the country is deeply sorry for the atrocity while he was addressing Parliament on Thursday.
On behalf of the federal government, I apologize to the mixed-race people with roots in Belgian colonization and their families for the injustice and suffering they went through. I also wish to express all our compassion for the African mothers whose children were torn away from them.
Some of those who were ripped from their parents were in the parliament for the address. Back in 2016, the Catholic Church apologized for its role in running schools and orphanages for the children. Belgium's colonial rule in Central Africa was also very deadly. Millions of slave laborers died as Belgium exported rubber and other resources out of Central Africa. Kevin Osbeck, CGTN, Brussels.
Angolan President João Lourenço has been on an extensive visit to Russia, holding talks with President Vladimir Putin and attending a business forum. The visit comes amid growing Russian influence on the African continent, as Julia Chapman reports from Moscow.
The four-day visit by the Angolan president marks a significant stepping up in the relations between Russia and Angola. And it was President João Lourenço's first visit in his role as leader, but it's not unfamiliar territory for him, as the president studied at Russia's military political academy. And he pointed to those close ties when speaking at a business forum this week, where he told journalists that Angola and Russia are spiritually aligned. And the relations between the two countries date back to the 1960s, when the Soviet Union provided guerrilla groups in Angola with weapons.
Yesterday I spoke at the opening of the Economic Forum of Angola and Russia in Moscow to get Russian entrepreneurs interested in investing their resources in the Angolan economy.
President Lourenço met with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday, where the two discussed broadening cooperation in a number of spheres, including trade, economic and humanitarian. They also signed a number of bilateral agreements.
We should see what needs to be done in the near future to intensify trade and economic relations. There are interesting directions: diamond production, fishing, space.
And diplomats from the two countries also held consultations on draft agreements in the spheres of space, nuclear energy and diamond mining. President Lourenço's visit to Moscow comes as Russia has been renewing its focus on Africa and growing its role in the region. Political analysts say that it's partly economic, that Russia wants a slice of the untapped resources on the continent, but also partly political, as Russia tries to grow its influence abroad. Russia will be hosting a major summit of African leaders in Sochi later this year, and President Putin extended an invitation to President Lourenço during his visit this week. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
Nigeria's government has set up an inter-ministerial panel to investigate rampant building collapses in the country. A recent collapse in the commercial capital Lagos left dozens killed and has triggered this investigation. CGTN's Kelechi Mekelam has more.
Emergency rescue workers in search of survivors at a construction site in the capital, Abuja. More than a dozen construction workers are believed to be trapped under the rubble. It's a common sight across Nigeria, buildings collapsing under their weight and killing dozens. And quite a number of investigations are abandoned along the way. But the government now wants to change that. Triggered by recent deaths in building collapses in commercial capital Lagos, the government now wants every incident investigated to the very end. And findings would be used to develop a more robust regulatory policy to avoid building collapses.
Every building collapse should be investigated, because there must be some information that we'll learn that may be unique and can help us in making sure that we stop any future reoccurrence. So we are very hopeful that what we are doing today will help to secure human life and also protect our environment.
Nigeria already has existing regulations to prevent building collapses, and they include mandatory inspections of construction sites by qualified construction engineers from government. The job is to ensure construction design is safe and construction materials are not substandards. But still, building collapses have not been checked enough. Rotimi Faso has spent the past 15 years rebuilding, redesigning and sometimes reinforcing defective structures.
Governments need to sit up. We have to look at the ISO need to work on this, all the substandard qualities of materials that we have that comes into our sites.
In the past 4 years, Nigeria has recorded about 60 building collapses. In March alone, there were 3 known cases in the commercial capital, Lagos. The committee has 2 weeks to come up with recommendations on how to stop building collapses. But even as they embark on investigations, many in the construction sector believe a lot could be achieved if only government enforced existing guidelines. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Here in Kenya, government and aid agencies are distributing food relief to drought-hit parts of the country. A hunger crisis has left at least 1 million people short of food. Lack of rains has caused crops to fail in the northern regions, such as Turkana and Garissa. Let's take a look.
In a homestead in Lodwar, a town in Kenya's Turkana County, Christine Ewisit sorts the little maize she has left to feed her family. The mother of 4 says the ration is part of aid recently distributed to residents in the region.
When we wake up in the morning, our children have nothing to eat. They stay hungry all day and eat only in the evening. In the event that we have food stocks like this bag of maize, for example, there's nothing else to eat.
Pastoralist communities in Turkana have lived in this semi-arid region for centuries. But over the years, droughts have been a major threat to their herds and crops. Since August, the dry spell has left 1 million people short of food.
The current drought is still ongoing. It is still severe, and therefore the population is still being affected. The relief food through the county government is continuing. Relief food through the national government is continuing. That will continue until we make sure that we have the rains.
Kenya is hit by droughts every few years and has struggled to prevent hunger despite numerous projects to bolster people living in arid lands.
We are still suffering, but we are happy today with the food aid. The rations will help us get energy to work. The region has no rain. We thank whoever has brought this food here today. We are urging the county government to help us with water or even a borehole so we can irrigate our farms.
To improve food stocks, pastoralists are being encouraged to grow crops alongside keeping their livestock.
The maize on this farm is a reality, as you can see. The first time I harvested maize, I took it to the mill to get some maize flour for our meals. We used to hear about kale grown in other parts of the country. We've also planted it here, and it has done very well. Now, we can also wash our hands to eat kale like everyone else.
Kenya's Deputy President William Ruto announced last month that the government has allocated $90 million to respond to the drought. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Recapping your top stories this hour, we start with the Ethiopian Airlines crash. Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg has acknowledged for the first time that an automated flight system on the Boeing 737 MAX played a role in the crash on March 10th and that of another 5 months earlier. The apology from the world aviation giant came after Ethiopia's Transportation Department released its preliminary report on Thursday. Tension is brewing in Libya after forces loyal to Eastern Libyan commander Khalifa Haftar captured the city of Garian, 100 kilometers south of the capital Tripoli. The United Nations Security Council says it's deeply concerned by military movements and the risk of confrontation in the country. It's due to hold an emergency meeting later today. Uganda's Inspector General of Police has joined rescue efforts for an American tourist and driver who were kidnapped at the Queen Elizabeth National Park. The two were reportedly taken by unknown gunmen while on a game drive in western Uganda. Police say Kimberly Sue Endicott arrived in Uganda on March 29th and flew to the park the next day in the country's southwest. And the Kenyan government and aid agencies are distributing food relief to drought-hit parts of the country. A hunger crisis has left at least 1 million people short of food. Lack of rains has caused crops to fail in the northern regions, such as Turkana and Garissa. And those are your top stories this hour. Coming up in your business news, up next. Nigeria plans to raise $5 billion in foreign and local bonds for infrastructure development. And the EU Council's President, Donald Tusk, proposes a 12-month delay for Brexit.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We start your business news in Nigeria, where the government is seeking Parliament's approval to borrow $5.39 billion for the 2019 financial year. The funds are meant for infrastructure development and economic stimulus. The debt office intends to raise over $2 billion through foreign borrowing and the rest from local bonds. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, has been racking up debt in an effort to boost economic growth, which has been sluggish since exiting recession in 2017. Domestic debt will be made up of federal government, sukuk, green and saving bonds. The government is planning a 30-year domestic bond. Nigeria's total public debt stood at $79.44 billion by the end of 2018. And turning to Brexit now, UK Prime Minister Theresa May has formally asked the EU to delay Brexit until the 30th of June. The UK is due to leave the EU on the 12th of April, and as yet, no withdrawal deal has been approved. Earlier sources indicated that European Council President Donald Tusk has proposed to make an offer of a 12-month flexible extension. That would still allow the UK to leave sooner if the British Parliament were to ratify a deal, but the plan needs to be agreed on by EU leaders next week at a summit. Tusk said the EU should not ignore the increasing majority of British people who want to remain in the bloc. However, Theresa May said she would seek a delay that is as short as possible. Some observers say if the talks between UK's Conservative and Labour parties fail, the delay is likely to be a long one. Meanwhile, the British government is scrambling to find parliamentary consensus over the terms of Brexit ahead of the April 12th deadline. WTO Director General Roberta Azevedo warned Thursday that the costs of a no-deal departure from the EU for the British economy would be significant.
There will be costs, and the costs may be very significant in some sectors and may be less significant in other sectors. But overall, there will be an impact. We all know that.
And turning to the oil markets now, oil prices fell on Friday, with international benchmark Brent futures slipping away from the $70 mark. Brent dropped after briefly rising above that level in the previous session. US West Texas Intermediate was also down almost to $62. Experts say the fall was due to supply concerns and worries about progress in China-US trade talks. Still, Brent was heading for a second week of gains, while WTI was on track for a fifth consecutive weekly rise. Oil prices have gained this year after OPEC and producer allies such as Russia agreed to cut output by 1.2 million barrels per day to prevent a supply overhang from growing. A senior energy analyst at Interfax Energy, Abhishek Kumar, said that prices are now finally balanced. Meanwhile, Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil producer, has just made its case as the world's most profitable company by revealing key financial data ahead of a planned bond issue. Jacob Greaves has more from Dubai.
Its wealth might be buried beneath the sands of Saudi Arabia, but now it's also available for all to see. Previously reluctant to disclose its financial details, Saudi Aramco has had to open the door as it looks to tap bond markets. The oil giant's 2018 core earnings were $224 billion, 3 times as much as Apple.
The financials look extremely healthy to us, whether you look at the leverage numbers, which look extremely low, or you look at the profitability numbers. The balance sheet and the P&L looks in a very healthy shape. Margins are stable, you have production stable, and moreover you have 3 years of data now that you have the prospectus out, right? So you have more transparency.
Despite the huge profits, credit agencies have rated it on a par with Saudi Arabia. Fitch and Moody's have graded it A+ and A1 respectively, a reflection of the state-owned oil company's ties to the kingdom's at times sluggish economy. But both have said without sovereign rating constraints, it would match better-rated international oil firms such as Chevron and Shell. Even after the recently announced stake in Saudi petrochemical firm SABIC for $69.1 billion, analysts say its balance sheet stands out.
In Aramco's case, it's actually got net cash, so it's got negative net debt, and its gross debt is fairly small. Obviously, this bond issue, if and when it goes through, will raise its net debt to a degree, but still, the cash reserves are very large. Some of those cash reserves, of course, are going to be used for the acquisitions of the stake in SABIC from the Public Investment Fund. So it'll move towards having less cash and somewhat more debt. But still, it will have a very low net debt compared to the major international oil companies, which, as I say, have typically financed themselves rather more from debt.
Earlier this year, Saudi Arabia said Aramco's anticipated bond sale would raise $10 billion. This planned bond deal is also attracting attention as it's Aramco's inaugural transaction in international markets. That's after the firm pushed back their planned IPO for 2018, estimated at the time to be worth around $100 billion until 2021. The challenge is the fortunes of the world's top oil producer are still linked to energy prices and Saudi Arabia's broader economic development. Aramco will hope that doesn't put investors off this week as it looks abroad with a roadshow for bond buyers. Asia, Europe and the United States are said to be the main destinations. Notably, no Middle East country made the list as it looks to drill into international markets. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
Uganda's fish exports are on the rise. The country's Export Promotions Board says the growth it has registered is due to a significant increase in fishing stocks. It comes after a government crackdown on illegal fishing activities. CGTN's Michael Baleke has that report.
Selling to the highest bidder. The fish market in Uganda is booming once again. The recent clampdown on illegal fishing practices is seeing results.
And you know what? Fish which had gone way down even to below $100 million US dollars. In 2018, we got over $171 million US dollars.
Growing pressure on Uganda's lakes over the last 2 decades had resulted in the depletion of fish stocks. But now, factories that previously had to close shop have reopened, and the government is targeting fish farming to further reduce dependency on the lakes.
We are going to release the pressure from our natural lakes. Not everybody should go to the lake to get fish. Some people should really farm this fish. So government is going to help, especially the youth and the women and other people.
However, not everyone is better off. The increased supply of fish has come with market challenges. Thousands of fishermen in Uganda live off the waters of Lake Victoria, but the low price of fish at the local market is threatening their livelihoods. The Nile perch species is the most traded fish in the export market, but fishermen say they are not breaking even at the current price.
We are catching more than enough fish, but the market cannot take it all. So we want government to allow us preserve the fish by smoking as we previously did to avoid losses.
Prices have gone down due to increased supply. This is good for the local people who previously could not afford fish on their menu.
For some time now, Uganda has been relying on the European Union market to take much of its fish exports. But as stocks continue to multiply, authorities in Uganda are looking to new markets like China to absorb the excess. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
An award-winning winemaker is putting Rwanda on the map. Assumpta Uwamaria is not your average winemaker, though. She's ditched grapes for a healthier option to produce dry red wine. Hlonela Lopowana tells us more.
Indigenous wines are not a popular commodity in East Africa, and a young Rwandan entrepreneur is using that opportunity to grow her business. When you think of wine ingredients, grapes come to mind, but Assumpta Uwamaria is switching things up with a special vegetable ingredient popular for its health benefits.
When I was working at a fruit and vegetable market, it wasn't satisfying. My boss at the time didn't pay very well, plus I had dreams of working for myself. I often thought, if these vegetables came from Rubavu, that's my home. Why can't I plant something and make a profit? I then started farming. I thought it would bring immediate profit, but I made a loss the first time round.
Uwamaria turned to beetroot to make what has now become a very popular wine in Rwanda. A trained clinical psychologist, Uwamaria didn't find it easy here at first. But she didn't give up. Instead, the 28-year-old took Skype lessons, first on how to make juice. Wasn't long until Uwamaria learned how to use beetroot as a major ingredient to produce dry red wine. Beets are high in immune-boosting vitamin C, fiber, and essential minerals like manganese, which is good for your bones, liver, kidney, and pancreas.
First, I go to the farm, assess which beetroots are good enough, because if some are not ripe enough, they won't make good wine. I prepare and put them in the machine for blending, boil, and let the beetroot juice cool. Once it's stored in these baskets, I have to make sure that this room is the right temperature for fermentation. After 4 months, I sieve the juice, store it in the tanks for another 4 months until it's fermented.
Before Karisimbi wine hits the shelves, the Rwanda Standards Board first tests the product. Once approved, the wine is packaged and ready for the market. For a little under $6, she sells her wine at local kiosks in Kigali as well as in Rubavu, just outside the capital city. An online platform for made-in-Rwanda products has made it easier for Karisimbi wines to reach international customers. It's already drawn interest from China.
I'm getting an opportunity to enter the Chinese market through a previous interview I did with France 24. Someone from China saw the clip and reached out to me via WeChat. The client asked me to start sending them wine, but they had asked for a large quantity which I couldn't immediately produce. Exporting large quantities requires that I get an RSB certificate. That's what I'm organizing at the moment in order to deliver the wine by June.
Assumpta Uwamaria is currently producing wine from her home in Rubavu with the help of 6 permanent workers. But as her client base grows, she plans on building a bigger processing plant, exploring with different flavors like banana and pineapple, as well as hire 30 more people from her community. Hlonela Lopowana, Rubavu in western Rwanda.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Women in Egypt are breaking traditional stereotypes to become tour guides in the Rocky Mountains of Wadi Sahu.
Join us in Global Business. See Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's start in South Africa now, where an elephant known as Riffraff had faced a possible death sentence for knocking down fences and trampling on farmland. But Riffraff has now secured a reprieve after activists intervened. Landowners near the Kruger National Park had sought a court ruling to have the 6-ton bull elephant put down after he damaged their property. Activists from Humane Society International say killing the elephant would be a quick fix to a biological and environmental issue. Many communities across Africa are living in areas where elephants roam. As many as 50 destruction permits were issued against trespassing elephants between 2016 and 2017 in South Africa.
Riffraff is fitted with a satellite telemetry collar, so this is a collar that is around his neck, and that collar actually works remotely with the satellite, and we are able to see where Riffraff is in space and time on an hourly basis. So that collar actually ensures Riffraff's safety and his survival, because we can see where he is and we can take proactive measures to keep him safe.
In Egypt, Bedouin women in the Sinai region are breaking traditional and gender stereotypes. We follow 3 women who've decided to be tour guides in the Rocky Mountains of Wadi Sahu.
Yasser is leading hikers through the intricate trails of the majestic South Sinai Mountains. She and 3 other women from the Hamada tribe are guides for the Sinai Trail.
We want to integrate women for the first time in the tourism industry. They have never done it before. We would like tourists to come to this trail because some people don't have jobs and some are looking for employment. Those who do not have a job only work in tourism to earn their living.
Since 2016, this community-backed organization has been working to make hiking a sustainable form of adventure tourism to South Sinai. In the village of Wadi Sahu, tourism has been on the decline since the Arab Spring.
Yasser, she's a very strong woman. She's very unusual, I think, in the context of Bedouin society, because what she's doing is taking this first step that I think other women have been cautious about taking. She knows the mountains very well. She knows all of the ways. She knows the water sources, the plants, the animals, the old stories, the tribal boundaries.
North Sinai itself is a flashpoint of deadly violence between Egyptian security forces and insurgents. But the violence has not dissuaded a steady stream of avid hikers from heading south to take on the challenge of the desert and mountainous landscape.
If I was to listen to the advice that, for example, my government, the British government, would give about the Sinai, they would say, don't come, don't leave Sharm el-Sheikh, it's dangerous, it's kind of a no-go area. But through knowing the Sinai well, through walking thousands of kilometers with the Bedouin, I've really come to see that they take safety very seriously, they protect their area, and most of all, they know the Sinai better than anybody else.
The number of hikers has gone up from 100 in 2016 to 1,000 last year.
Coming from Bedouin guides, this was really strange. I didn't think that this could happen. This is why I got very attracted to this trip and I wanted to join.
Up until this point, 100% of those working on this trail were men. Yasser is shaking up centuries of cultural tradition, one hike at a time. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Here's what's coming up in your sports news up next. Kenya and defending champions Namibia through to the 2019 Bartes Cup final.